Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michael Berger. I'm a project coordinator for Uplift, the Central Iowa Basic Income Pilot, along with my colleague, Ashley Ezio, where we make up the project coordination team for the pilot. Now, before we get into today's event, there are just a few housekeeping items that I'm going to quickly cover. First is that we do have closed captioning that is available for today's event. That is being provided by Tracy Steele. For our folks online, captioning can be turned on by clicking the closed captioning button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. We do have a couple folks that will be walking around today. We have Craig from Signature Productions, and we have John from John Lemon's Photography, who will be capturing today's event and excitement. Also, please feel free to grab food and snacks over the course of the evening tonight. Those are just in the hallway, as you saw when you entered in, along with the restrooms, just in case if you need them. But I believe that's it, so let's get into tonight's event. Tonight, I have the absolute honor and privilege to welcoming you all to a very special evening, one that we've all been waiting for the past 3.5 years. So I'd like to welcome you all to Uplift's Final Findings Community Conversation. Now, yes, absolutely. Now, most of you have been with us since 2023 when we first started, but just to give you a bit of a refresher, Uplift is a local research study that was examining the impacts of a basic income on recipients' health and well-being. And really, it was designed to generate local Iowa-specific data to really help us understand how we can have more cost-effective policies that address economic instability across our communities. This project came to life thanks to the diverse group of 11 funders that represent the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, who joined forces to explore a different strategy for how we could be better supporting our low-income working families. With research expertise coming from the University of Pennsylvania's Center for Guaranteed Income Research and Des Moines University's Public Health Department, we officially launched recruitment in February of 2023. So, over the past few years, 250 Central Iowans have been sharing their lived experiences with our researchers by completing surveys and participating in interviews. So I, as well as the whole entire Uplift team, would like to share our sincerest appreciation and gratitude to those 250 individuals that opened up their lives to help us better understand how a basic income of $500 a month impacted their lives. Now, during today's event, we will get to hear directly from our researchers at the Center for Guaranteed Income Research about what they learned from Uplift. If you have any questions for them and would like to submit those, you can text those to our number at 515-612-8540. Again, that number is 515-612-8540. I apologize. I realized that I had the clicker up here. You can find the number up here, though, as well as on your tables. After their presentation, we will then have a few questions for our researchers, and then we'll have a short panel discussion to hear from a couple of the pilot's partners, followed by then a short film that tells the story of Uplift. And then that will conclude our night. So we have an eventful evening ahead of us, so I'd like to introduce you to our researchers at the Center for Guaranteed Income Research, Dr. Amy Castro and Dr. Stacia West. First, Dr. Amy Castro is an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania in the School of Social Policy and Practice and is the co-founder and faculty director of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research. Her work explores economic mobility, guaranteed income, innovation, and disparities in housing and lending. She served as the co-PI of the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration under former Mayor Michael Tubbs, which led to a proliferation of experimentation with unconditional cash across the U.S. Dr. Castro is the co-PI of over 30 applied cash transfer studies housed at CGIR, where she currently advises more than 20 mayoral teams, state and county legislators on unconditional cash research. And then we have Dr. Stacia West. Dr. Stacia West is an associate professor at the University of Tennessee's College of Social Work and the co-founder and director of the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. West holds a BA in Women's Studies and Philosophy and a Master's of Science in Social Work from the University of Tennessee. She holds a PhD in Social Welfare from the University of Kansas, and she also is a co-PI of the American Guaranteed Income Studies, a multi-site trial of unconditional cash transfers. Her research focuses on universal basic income, unconditional cash transfers, women's poverty and wealth inequality, and the affordable housing crisis. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Amy Castro and Dr. Stacia West to the stage.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Thank you, Dr. Nalo Johnson, for the opportunity to speak with this incredible group of people today. Thank you to the participants that are in the audience, whose data we are representing today. And just one bit of housekeeping. I'm a nervous public speaker, even though I am a professor. So what would make me feel at home is if you pull out your phone and just stare at it and scroll your life away, like my students do in class. Perfect. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is just a context and timeline of the pilot. It's real small, but what I want you to take away from this is that the pilot occurred at a historic point in macroeconomic history, right, where we see inflation at an incredibly high rate, and coming through the tail end of that, here in Iowa was certainly felt in households. So some key research questions that we'll be covering today. How does basic income impact finances, employment, housing status, and food security? How does basic income impact the household environment, parental time, and children's educational outcomes? And then finally, how does basic income impact physical and mental well-being, including hope and mattering, which I know that hope piece is something you all center on a lot here in Iowa, so I'm excited to share that with you. So I'll first start just by giving you the participant demographics. Importantly, as soon as I show this slide, people become numbers, right? That person is no longer the person that gave you the quarter at Aldi so you could put your cart away. They are no longer the person that sits next to you in the pew and you haven't asked their name. I want you to really try to remember that these are your neighbors. These are the community members that you see every day. So as you think about her, it's largely women that are in this study. She is a 37-year-old woman living in Dallas, Warren, or Polk County. She is raising at least 2 children on $20,000 a year. So keep her in mind as we share these stories with you today. This shows a little bit about, oh, go ahead, scooch back, okay. A little bit about those median incomes, so $24,000 a year across treatment and control. Education, highest being high school, some few who had an associate's degree or higher. Most folks speaking English at home, but some Spanish speakers. Okay, we'll get into our first set of research questions around work ethic, affordability, and nested financial logic. Go ahead. All right, what this slide is showing you in very tiny font is just how the average household income changed over time. So as I said, around $21,000 for the control group, $24,000 for the treatment group. Over time, we see increases in people's income, right? This is over the course of several years. We would anticipate seeing increases as the treatment group receives that $500 per month. By the end of the study, you actually see about a $3,000 gap between the treatment and the control group. All right, it has a delay.
It doesn't. Just keep an eye on the screen right there.
Oh, okay, yeah. Perfect. So this question here asks about emergency financial preparedness. And this is something we face every day, right? The tire that goes flat, the car that won't start because the battery is dead, the fact that your kid needs to go to urgent care. Do you have the money in your bank account or on a credit card that you can pay off in cash that month? This is the question that we're asking of people. If there was a financial emergency, would you be able to cover it? Over time, you see in this leftmost baseline where it's about 10% of people in control and 8% of people in treatment, the treatment being those that received the uplift, right? What we see in this chart is exactly what we want to see, a widening between those two groups. And so you see by the end of the experiment, about 31% of people in the treatment group feel confident that if there is a financial emergency, they're gonna have that money in the bank, they're gonna have the ability to pay off that credit card and not fall into debt because of it. Whereas the control group is around 22%. I will say, though this gulf seems wide, it did not reach statistical significance in our models. Next, I'll present financial well-being. So financial well-being is a score that is a range that was developed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which thankfully still exists. And so what it does is it measures just your financial capability. Are you banked? Do you have access to credit, right? Are you able to pay your bills on time? Over time, we measured the participants and those in the control group and found no significant difference between the two of them, right? And so you might be starting to ask why, at about this point, did you give people $500 per month and yet we see no significant differences in these financial outcomes? I've done a lot of work around understanding the local context of sort of the microeconomy that is these three counties, right? And at the same time that this money was being delivered, we also see increases in grocery prices, increases in rent, and additionally, destruction of specific programs and structures that were there to hold people up, right, that are no longer available because of austerity measures at both the federal and the state level, right? So those that had less to begin with are being asked to do more with even less. So I think this is likely why these sort of structural issues that we're not seeing the big statistically significant changes in these financial outcomes. It's not all for naught. Please hold. So when we look at savings and debt, this first table on your left shows you the number of participants with savings under $200. So at baseline, you see treatment and control fairly matched, right? They kind of keep on pace with one another. The same is true for those making debt payments, fairly equal across the time periods.
We're going to switch gears. We're going to switch back and forth as we go. I'm Amy, as Michael mentioned earlier. So one of the things that I do on sort of my half of the projects is I'm the one whose team follows up with people to figure out how and why behind these numbers, right? So we know that survey data or quantitative data tell us what's happening, but it doesn't tell you how or why. So part of what my role is stepping in and asking people, what is your experience of Uplift? What is the experience of your daily life? How are you getting by? And we've done these projects all over the United States, and this is a finding that we have found for the first time in Iowa, which is really exciting. So it's a term that I like to call nested financial logic. Now, when we think about basic income, or in other states, sometimes they call it guaranteed income, there's this really particular set of behaviors that people engage in. Usually in the first 1 to 6 months of them receiving sort of unconditional cash, what people typically do is they shore up their sort of past debts, they get their house really stable, they focus on immediate scarcity needs. That was not the case in Iowa. People were far more savvy. Instead, what we saw here was people engaged in this form of nested financial logic, where the steps that they took financially from literally day one tended to have short and long-term goals bundled together in one step. So in other words, kind of the mindset of frugality here meant that people were able to stretch that $500 much farther than they were in many other places, because they were focusing on taking steps like paying down debt or improving assets, or sort of engaging in different forms of saving that would help them in the short term and in the long term. So they had this sort of eye towards constant planning, which you'll see show up again in just a few minutes.
Okay. There's no way you can read this table. Very important.
But it's okay. You can read it online later.
Very important finding. No one in Warren, Dallas, or Polk County quit their job for $500 a month. They're financially savvy and knew they could not live on that. What they did do, right, is use this money in a way that they could buy more time to spend with their families. And I'll let Dr. Castro talk more about that. My job is the numbers. It's very boring. Okay, so what do we see in this table that you cannot read? no changes that were significant between the treatment and the control groups at any period whenever we looked at differences in job statuses. So did they shift from seasonal employment to being a stay-at-home parent? Maybe a few did, not enough to be significant. One of the really fascinating things that we saw, though, was that at the 18-month period, those in the treatment group were actually working 3 more hours per week than those in the control group. So you can make the argument that having a basic income actually increases productivity at work.
And I just had to throw this quote in there. This is from one of your participants. One of the questions we asked people is, what's your experience of work? What's it like? And this particular woman who chose the fake name Ava said, you die with your boots on. If you're sick, you're going to work. If you're missing a leg, you're going to work. You just go. And there's 2 ways that I could look at that quote. On the one hand, I could look at that and say, incredible work ethic, killer discipline, amazing. On the other hand, as a public health scientist, I look at that and I'm like, does this woman have paid leave? Right? Does she have access to health insurance? Is she actually able to continue to work and take care of her body and her family? Spoiler alert, she was able to. So you should read the report to find out more details. Back to you.
All right, the next set of findings I have for you are around basic needs, housing and food security. So in the first table, what we're asking is, did you worry that your household would not have enough food to eat? You can see at the 6-month point, there is a significant finding here where we find that guaranteed income is basic income is causally associated with reductions in household food insecurity for those that received the money compared to those that did not. When we look at housing cost burden, we do not find any significance, but we do find something I think that is alarming and something that many of you in this room probably already know. A large number of people are paying more than 30% of their monthly take-home income just to put a roof over their head. The quality of that housing varies quite a bit. But this table here shows you that at baseline, about 45%, the median housing cost burden was 45% and 44%. So that's the percentage of take-home pay that people are spending just on rent. All right. This is, I think you guys have seen this before, but this is how did people spend the money, right? When I first started doing this work, I'm from the South. People ask me, how do people spend the money? And I was like, God, that's rude. Don't ever ask people that. As we worked with communities more and more and advocates in this space, they said, show people how we spend the money, right? Because they believe that we spend it irresponsibly. Start showing them. So we did anonymously start aggregating how the spending patterns look. And what you see is what you see when you look at your own bank account, most likely. Your own, we use NerdWallet, but anyway. Retail sales and services, so things like Walmart, Target, big box stores. Food and grocery stores are the largest share at around 68%. Transportation, so gas and car insurance and car repairs come in next at around 11%. Housing and utilities around 9%. Travel, leisure, and entertainment, I wish that was higher, at only 4%, and so forth.
Okay, so as Dr. West mentioned a few minutes ago, one of the other things that we're principally interested in is seeing when we provide people with unconditional cash, how does it change the experience of their parenting? How does it change the tenor of their home? And in this case, what we were really looking at really specifically was this concept called responsive caregiving, which is things like being able to respond to an infant on cue. So this is really anchored in 2 different models. The first is the family stress model, which I hope some of you in the room have heard about it because it was developed right here in Iowa out of the farm crisis in the 70s. And what this model shows is that it's not the presence or the absence of material goods or finances that impacts children. It's the psychological processes that happen to the parent or the caregiver when they're no longer able to provide for their kids in the way that they want to. Importantly, what both of these models highlight throughout more than 35 years of research and science is that regardless of income level or of class or of background, Parents, by and large, desire to provide for their kids. And when they're no longer able to, and they continue to work, and they work harder and harder, but they're making less and less, it undermines their ability to parent, and it undermines their sense of self and sort of their identity.
So this chart is showing you a measure that it's so inappropriately named the chaos score, and it is a measure of your household environment. So for those of us with children, you understand that it is sometimes called chaos, but it stands for the confusion, hubbub, order, scale. So what it's measuring is how orderly, or like what the rhythm of your household environment is, right? So one of the questions on this survey asks, to what extent does your house feel like a zoo? Right? And you rate that. So we track that.
But what if you have a lot of animals?
Right. We rate that between treatment and control, track that between treatment and control across the time periods, across the 30 months. And you see a significant finding here at 12 months, where the treatment group is reporting, hey, my household is actually quite calm in comparison to control. So here we have another causal finding, very important. So basic income is causally associated with increasing harmony and predictability, calming disorganization in the household.
Now, to just give you sort of a sense as to how and why that happens, right? So anybody here who has raised a young child knows what's the best time of day? Like, let's be honest, people. Is it when the child's awake after a long day, or when your child's asleep after a long day, right? So if you are somebody who is living in sort of an unpredictable work sector, let's say that your boss is constantly changing your hours, or you don't know when you're going to work, when you're coming home from work, that level of unpredictability really undermines parents' capacity to create structure for their kids. So you go to the pediatrician says, it'd be really wonderful if you put your child to bed at the same time every night and followed the structured sleep routine. It would be better health for everybody. Like, well, guess what? I never know when I'm coming home from work, right? And so we know that that lack of time, that lack of clock time, right, that lack of predictability and scheduling really shows up in people's well-being and health, and also in the way that they engage with their kids. So one of the things that we look at and that we saw in this particular study was an increase in something called process time. Right, so if I think about clock time, that's the hours on my watch, right? Process time is a little bit different. Process time is relational. Process time is nested in relationships. Process time means something like when it's time to change a child's diaper, it's time to change a child's diaper. The child does not care if it's 2:20 and you have to pick somebody up from the bus stop. Your baby does not care if somebody else expects you to be someplace else on the other side of town. And so what we see all the time amongst families who are caught in low-wage labor is that they're torn between these two things. And what we saw in your study really specifically was parents reporting to us, and you can see Margaret here, who calls herself Snack Mom, that they had an increase in availability for not just predictability in their scheduling, but also an increase in the amount of presence and time and engagement that they had with their kids and also with other children around them.
We also measured children's educational outcomes, or more specifically, we asked parents, how much do your children enjoy school? You can see these dark blue bars represent strongly agree, and the light blue bars represent agree. They're very consistent over time because apparently y'all have great schools and children love going to them. We saw no changes over time in this outcome.
Should underscore this, y'all, okay? The reason we saw no changes here is because people were really happy with the schools from the very beginning. Yeah. They couldn't really change much. They could have gone down, but there wasn't very far to go up. Okay, and our last set of findings here.
So in this last set of findings, we measure a couple of psychological and physical constructs. So the first being physical health, just self-reported physical health. So here you see, again, the mean scores between the treatment and control group are very similarly matched over time. We don't see significant differences in between them. And I'll say it's very common that we don't see significant changes in physical health in a fairly short time span like this, with a fairly young population, remember, around age 37 years old. So many of those chronic health conditions hopefully will not creep up, but if they were going to, would likely happen later on in life.
Where we did see change, though, was around agency over one's healthcare decisions and also healthcare utilization. So amongst the participants that sort of participated in these interviews that we conducted, we saw a split, and there were two different groups. So for people that were stably insured and did not have a lot of past medical debt, what they reported was an increased ability to be able to engage in preventative healthcare behaviors. So these meant things like choosing to go to the doctor when your kid is sick rather than skipping it and saying, I don't know what to do. Do I pay rent or do I take my child to the doctor? We also saw people being able to do things like re-engage with preventative care for chronic illness in a way that they had not prior. And key here is, this is really important because we talk a lot about healthcare access and utilization. And of course, we're all concerned about whether or not people have access to health insurance. But the takeaway here is that even if you have access to health insurance, if you don't have enough time to take off of work to actually go to the appointment, or you don't have enough cash to cover the copay or make up for that lost hour at work, you're not going to engage in the healthcare environment or the healthcare system. So it wasn't just the presence of health insurance, it was also the ability to pay for it.
This next slide tracks mental health on an instrument that you've probably been asked at your doctor's office, but it measures anxiety and depression. It's called the Kessler-10. So here we see most people across, based on the average scores, are within the strata of having a mild mental health disorder associated with anxiety or depression, and we did not see any significant changes over time in this specific variable. However, we did see the basic income have a causal impact here at 6 months, where people reported significantly less stress as compared to the control group.
So the thing I want you to sort of take away from this is that that band that Dr. West was just speaking about people sort of seeming as though they had a mild mental health disorder in the sort of domain of anxiety or depression, was people almost entirely attributed this to financial stress. People described the constant sort of like drumbeat of struggling to make ends meet as the key driver behind their struggles with mental health, and also the sense of social isolation that came along with it. I love this quote here from Ellie, who said, the $500 was so awesome because it's like I'm part of the middleman group where you get forgotten. And because I'm not struggling enough to actually get the help I need, but I'm not making enough money to survive. So this no strings attached aspect of basic income with the $500 reinforced this sort of self-reliance ethos of Central Iowa, and people felt validated and seen. And so they didn't describe sort of a complete restoration of mental well-being because they didn't feel as though their money had completely recovered. But what they talked about was suddenly having a floor to stand on where they could take a breath, think, and actually move forward with some goals. Now, the principal place that we saw change take place was on hope and mattering. So when we think about hope, right, if anybody here comes from a faith-based background, you sort of, that word might ping in your mind, some sort of Bible verse you memorized as a child in Sunday school. But in psychology, it's actually something that we can measure. Hope has 3 components. First is the capacity to set a goal. Second is the ability to visualize a pathway towards that goal. And then third is a sense of self-determination or agency, believing you can take steps along that path. And then mattering is the degree to which you feel seen and invested in by people who have power and control over your life. So it doesn't mean you feel as though your kids rely on you. It means, does anybody know that I'm here? Does anybody actually care that I'm working 65 hours a week in a diner outside of Des Moines? Does anybody care that I can't afford to feed my children? It's capturing this sense. Now, importantly, when we think about hope and mattering, it requires the presence of one very particular thing, the unknown, right? So in order to have hope, you have to have risk, right? If something is predictable, you don't say you're going to hope for it. You know it's going to be there. But when we think about the lack of upward mobility that some of these families encounter, despite the fact that they're working their tails off, hope becomes a really important ingredient because it's one of the missing sort of aspects or building blocks in economic mobility and in poverty alleviation. Because if I show up with the best intervention in the world to help somebody claw their way out of a financial circumstance that they might have found themselves in, completely like out of their own control, they're not going to grab onto that if they don't have hope. They're going to stay in the space of despair.
All right, we really did save the best for last. I've done about 45 basic income experiments across the US at this point. you all have the only findings that look like this. They are absolutely incredible. It speaks to the ethos of your people, the hope that they have for the future, and the ways that basic income can help them realize those goals. So exclusive to the receipt of a basic income, we see significant changes in total hope scores across 3 time points in the pilot, and significant findings increases in these scores in mattering and reliance at those same time points. So if I look at this sort of all together and say, what's the total story here? What kind of happened? Here's how I would put it. People that were struggling financially received a basic income. That helped reignite a spark that was already in them and helped them imagine a pathway toward the future. When they started thinking about steps, looking around at different programs that they might pursue, opportunities that they might have, unfortunately, they met structural roadblocks. The rent was never going to be affordable. The tuition was never going to work with the budget, right? So this is kind of the arc of what we're seeing here and leads us toward different programming from the learnings that we have with Uplift that can take these findings, pair them with other programs, and help people realize this hope that they have.
We're going to fast forward for the sake of time.
Yep.
Here's your key takeaways.
Yep. So your key takeaways. Iowans have a strong commitment to the labor force like I have not seen before. It is not impacted by receiving a basic income. In fact, I sometimes hope that people do work less, right? Americans work entirely too much. Our bodies and our minds suffer for it. But what we see here is that there is no impacting sort of the work ethic of Iowans. Basic income did reignite that spark of hope, as I mentioned, but without enough money to make meaningful financial strides, a lot of those hopes remain unrealized, and what we see instead is investment in children and families, and that's perfectly acceptable as an outcome. So the key takeaways sort of quantitatively, what did basic income cause here in Iowa? It caused improvements in savings. It caused reductions in stress. It bolstered agency, pathways, importance, awareness, and reliance.
And the last piece I'll add towards that is that it also increased the amount of time and the quality of time that parents in particular had, not only with their own children, but with other kids that were in their community. And they reported sort of being able to show up in the ways, importantly, that they had always wanted to. I think this is one last thing that I think we should say about this is that we talked a lot about goals. We talked a lot about pathways. Importantly, the $500 a month did not cause anybody to imagine a new goal for themselves. It didn't magically just take someone from being, hey, I would like to have a structured home. I didn't think of this before, right? It didn't do that. What it did was it removed a structural obstacle that was preventing people from being able to take steps to actualize goals and dreams that they had for themselves and their kids, and be able to step out and do that. And it also made them feel seen. So thank you.
Can you hear me? Awesome. Thank you, Dr. West, Dr. Castro. Thanks for coming all the way to Des Moines, Iowa to present on these findings and for being such a great partner. We're going to move into a Q&A specifically with our research team. So upon registration, we asked if you had questions. I've been monitoring the text messages too, so thanks for sending those in. So I'm going to kick off the first question with, there was a real emphasis around work ethic, workforce participation, and hope and mattering. They really stood out as something unique from our findings. How might these aspects inform local economic mobility initiatives?
Sure. So take basic income, pair it with a workforce development program, you are going to have incredible outcomes whenever it comes to thinking forward about, the areas, sort of the macroeconomic conditions here in Iowa, right? And also realizing outcomes for individuals. So We have a couple of different basic income studies across the US that are going right now with community college students that are interested sort of in the trades. So I would consider something like that. So you're taking down that barrier of access to higher education, and then also subsidizing the thing that we know causes people to drop out of workforce development programs. It's not a willpower issue, it's a resource issue. It's the fact that there is no childcare available, it's the fact that transportation is hard to come by and you need a car to get around. So a basic income can help offset those structural barriers and help people complete those types of programs.
Thank you so much for that. Dr. Castro, you talked a lot about hope, and you talked a lot about the science of that. Our health and human services system has really embraced the science of hope perspective in some of its programming. Can you explain the ways in which your findings are similar or different from the HHS understanding as it relates to social services offerings?
Get all these trick questions. I don't even live here. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, we're very excited about your hope findings. I said to Nalo the other day, I said I've been chasing causality on hope and mattering since 2016 in my work. Seriously, literally, I have. So I'm like that excited about it. I think the thing that's different is the presence of material support. Right? So as excited as I am about the sort of the concept of hope as something that you can actually measure, and the concept of mattering, like this idea of belonging in community and how it fits together to help people shore up their finances, the key ingredient from this study was that the $500 was causal. The people that were in the comparison group had access to the same social institutions, they had access to the same churches, the same social milieu, the same environment at the same period of time. The only difference between the two groups was that one got $500 a month unconditionally and one did not, right? So when we think about sort of leaning into the science of hope, hope only goes so far if the market or resources aren't there to meet it, right? So it works together. It's a concept of momentum, right? And how do you have a pathway if there's nothing at the other end? So one of the things that we heard over and over again from people that were in Uplift was the fact that they were watching resources they had constantly depended on in the past kind of go away. And so you could hear this frustration in their voices. I used to always call, we heard a lot about churches, I used to always call Church X, we'll say, for support. And people increasingly are saying, those programs are shut down, they don't exist anymore, or they're not serving me because I'm not a member of that congregation. And so folks kind of had this gnawing sense of social isolation, but then the $500 represented two things. One, a material reality that actually caused them to increase their hope and set a path for themselves. And two, it showed them that somebody could see their hard work. I think the thing that people talked about the most in terms of a sense of social isolation was this feeling of invisibility. Like, I am working so hard for my community. I'm showing up. I'm doing my part. I am doing what it means to be from Iowa, and nobody knows that I'm here. And so the $500 actually validated their work ethic, and that was the thing that caused them to have an increase in hope. It wasn't just teaching them about hope or telling them to have hope or describing what it might be. It was talking about that, but then in the context of receiving that $500.
That's really powerful. Thank you. I think we have time for one last question I'm going to squeeze in here. So you identified many trends in your quantitative analysis, but not all findings were statistically significant. How do you account for that significance of what you learned from your qualitative analysis?
Okay.
Real quick, you'll notice that the trends were in the right direction.
They were, yes.
Nothing looked terrible. These are not negative findings, they are null findings, and the trends are in the positive. Now, in terms of how do we square that with the qual, that's all her.
So, thanks. We're also married, by the way, so if you're wondering, that's half the banter. You're gonna get for that a little later. So when I take a step back, I said this at the beginning, but what survey data shows us and what numbers show us is what happened. It doesn't tell us how or why. So when we follow up with people and sort of hear their stories about what their lives are like, and we also did a really innovative study here as well, specifically looking at time use, which we didn't have time to present today, but was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. One of the things we saw was that those conversations captured things that numbers can never capture, frankly, right? So I can tell you at a point in time when somebody's score might be on a scale of depression, for instance. But what that misses is what it feels like to walk through your community feeling as though you don't matter, feeling as though you are working your tail off. I mean, the number of people that you have working in diners and restaurants and service industry where they are cleaning up after folks. Like, there'll be some of them here today cleaning up after us in this room, right? Just invisibly doing all that work. And so when we're following up with folks, hearing qualitatively sort of what that was like for them to receive the unconditional cash, it showed us two things. First, it showed us that they are paying attention to the social institutions, CBOs, and elected officials that are actually investing in them. Second is it shows us something that we call the counterfactual, right? So one of the strongest things that came through in the qualitative data was the fact that people described what their lives were like with the basic income and without the basic income. And when you talk to somebody who has gone from having almost nothing to then suddenly having $500 a month but still working, the difference in their life, these are little tiny small things, but they show up in really large palpable ways. I'll close with one last piece. That I mentioned sort of snack mom earlier, which is one great example. But there was another mom from your community who had a number of children, and one of her last kids was going to graduate from high school. And the deciding factor as to whether or not she was going to get to see her kid walk across that stage was the $500, because she could not afford the cap, the gown, the tickets, even getting there, right? So is that going to show up on a survey? No. But for that kid, for that moment, they felt like they were part of the graduating class like everybody else. And that parent got to sit in the audience with every other family in the community and be there to sort of like support their kid and cheer them on. And so it's those types of things, those intangible things that carry weight into the future in a way that numbers are never going to capture, and really show the power of what it feels like when you're able to just show up for someone. I know we didn't have a ton of time for questions, but our inboxes are truly open. So if folks have questions afterwards, please feel free to come up and corner us, or chase down Ashley or Michael, and they'll connect you with us over email.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks for dealing with our transition. I'm going to invite our panelists up to get this kicked off. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to jump right in because we have a full agenda. Dr. Joseph Jones, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off with you. Joseph, you're here representing our cross-sector collaborative funding group, and you wear a lot of hats with that role. Specifically, you are a board member for the Mid-Iowa Health Foundation and a city council member for the city of Windsor Heights. So my question for you is, investing in research and doing so with a number of additional private and public funders, it's not very common. Can you tell us why Uplift was an important opportunity to invest in from the funder perspective?
Sure. And I'll start with my role at the Mid-Iowa Health Foundation. So 5 years ago, when we first had this discussion, there was a, we're going to do what? moment. And following through from that, we thought, if we're really going to focus on systems change, if we're really going to work on moving the needle, it's going to require that we have teams of people together in partnership over the long haul. And you all know that. You know what systems change looks like and what the work requires. And so it's going to take all of us together to really work on this thing. So are we good with the echo? Okay. And so we knew we need to go on a journey, and we're going to go on a journey together. And this isn't about the individual funders, but I will ask everyone who's part of a funder group, please raise your hand. All right? These are the folks who said, you know what, we'll all jump in this RV together and go on this long trip together. And Yeah, we'll try it, and we'll do it, and it'll last for 3 years, and we're all dedicated to doing so. Because the question started with, what if? What if we can all really work together and dig in on something that is truly a systemic problem, and dig in, dedicate ourselves to a long-range study, wait for the results, and look for ways that we can implement that information. So that was one big appeal. You know, because you're talking about corporations, private, public, government entities that are all coming together to fund this, these entities are always being asked by different organizations to help fund bits and pieces, programs, projects, but it's rare that we get to all work on something together that we all think is a problem, that we can all leverage our dollars together to work on. So that was the second part that was exciting for me as a funder. And we all committed to wanting to create more, right? It's not just what one of our individual organizations could do to help make change, but what if we could put all of our money together and really do something big, something that hadn't been done before, and ask our community to join in with us to really delve deep and stay for 3 years to work on this together, which was really a big deal. So the outcome then would be, we're going to be able to give our community at the end of this all this data, all this rich information. We're going to be able to answer some questions. We're going to be able to hopefully redirect resources in a way that we've not been able to do before, because we've not taken the time to really do the data research and analysis and figure out what our piece of the pie can be in order to help other people. So that was also really, really exciting. So I think the timing couldn't have been more perfect in talking through what we wanted to do and where the need was. And so being able to collaborate with all the funding partners around the table was really special, and I think it continues to be so.
Thank you for that. Emily Westergaard, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
Hey, you have been so supportive of Uplift since its inception. Michael and I talk about you all the time and that support, as well as like every other person in this audience. So many hugs today. I'm curious, in your role as CEO of By Degrees Foundation, a nonprofit that's serving a lot of under-resourced families, what do you see as the value in having this type of economic mobility research occur in our community?
So as By Degrees Foundation, we work in public schools to help understand what challenges and barriers our kids and their families and their teachers might be facing, and then figure out solutions and coordinate that response. And we were so excited to be able to partner with Uplift because, number one, it was an opportunity to perhaps challenge assumptions about people living in poverty. One of the researchers said, it's easy to look at them as numbers, but these are real people, often invisible, that are doing, that are essential to our community. And a lot of us tend to make assumptions about what choices they make or why they are in the position that they are in. And so first and foremost, since we see those families and their kids on a daily basis, we know that a lot of those assumptions are incorrect. So having research to more objectively look at that is a wonderful opportunity to strengthen the discussion that we are having in the community about the root causes, as opposed to the symptoms that a lot of nonprofits in our community are focused on for very good reason. But we're not really going upstream and figuring out why are people in this position. And some of this basic income research, I think, can help us inform those discussions. I also, thinking about the findings, so By Degrees Foundation, we provide 529 college savings accounts for all of our students. And one of the reasons we do that is because there is so much research around hope, and that if you have $500 in a college savings account, you are 4 times more likely to graduate from college. Just like with this research, it has much less to do with how much that $500 will pay for, but it has to do with that hope and that mattering. And we tend to really forget that this is about more than just the money. It's about the sentiment that we care about our neighbors, and we want to make sure that they have that agency and that they have that, they can see the path and they feel like they can move forward in it. So we were incredibly supportive and are really impressed with the research.
Wonderful. Thanks for all you do for our community. Michael Berger. Hey, welcome back to the stage.
Seen each other lately?
As my counterpart on Uplift's project coordination team, we saw Uplift's community conversation series take shape really out of a desire to build some education and awareness around some of these basic needs topics in Central Iowa. I'm curious, how did you see that community conversations piece playing an important role in the overall experience of Uplift?
So that community conversation series, as you said, it really was born out of the opportunity to provide education and awareness building opportunities to really anybody that was interested in basic needs topics, whether that's housing instability, food insecurity, education, childcare, transportation, really any of it. Because many of those things is what our participants were dealing with and struggling to meet those needs. And so we wanted to create a space where we were able to connect, whether you were someone that was working within healthcare, or you were an expert in your field, or you were really just a passionate community member, where you could come to this conversation and learn from experts in the community. Not only this, but we wanted to make sure that it was accurate information and it was local data that was being talked about, so people really felt informed about these issues. When we were working with community partners as well, it was an important piece that in those conversations when we're talking about like, well, what does this look like for each of these conversations, we wanted to focus on what does this look like at the individual level. So what are those stories that people are saying as to why they're having such a hard time meeting their basic needs? And what is the emotion that's tied to that when you can't pay your rent or you have an eviction notice? And then we wanted to expand that conversation though from our experts to talk about, okay, well, what are the systemic challenges that people are encountering when they do need help and they're going to seek that help? What barriers are in their way where they cannot access that? And so we really wanted to marry those two conversations of, yes, the emotional tie of what this looks like at the individual level, but also let's talk about the system at play. And so I think that was a really good formula to have, and really kind of the last point I say of why I think it was an important aspect was all of our events were solutions focused. So it's one thing to talk about the issues and identify the problems, but we didn't want those events or those conversations to get stuck in just talking about the problem. We wanted to move that conversation forward, talk about the good things that are also happening in our community, talk about our organizational partners that are really doing the hard work and trying to address these problems at the root causes, and be able to connect folks to that, right? Really build this community. And it also was just a great way to keep folks engaged over the next 3.5 years, so that when we did have the final findings, that our community really was ready to have this conversation about these issues that our community members were having. And so I think that was kind of the formula we had for those community conversations. And in addition to the research and the hope that comes from that findings, I think really played an important aspect to the identity of Uplift.
I want to just add, I'm going to jump in here, that those community conversations were really informative, and specifically the one on housing and the one on navigating public benefits. That sort of information has not up to now really been easily available or easily digestible for community members, let alone nonprofits, and those conversations have directly impacted or informed how we've changed our work. And that's the sort of that's another big benefit of this Uplift project that maybe we don't talk about as much.
Yeah. And the resources created from those,
Yeah.
really great.
Can I have the extras when they're?
Absolutely. Hey, that's a really good plug for checking out our table in the back that has all of these community conversations. It also has materials that you should use, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what they're there for. And a big thank you to everyone in this room who supported the production of those. We've built some great memories as well.
Yeah.
Joseph, I'm going to have you close this out here with one last question.
Okay.
So the aim of this project was to provide some local data to inform some local solutions regarding poverty reduction and economic mobility. Given the preemption law that was instituted in 2024, prohibiting local governments from implementing basic income programs, are there any lessons learned through the pilot that you believe can be helpful in thinking about addressing basic needs issues as we move forward?
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I remember that day very, very vividly. I'm sure many people in the room, right? There was some collective anger and sighs, and and back to educating, right? First step was, okay, how can we go up to the legislature and educate them on what we're doing, help them understand a basic income pilot program, help them understand what this type of research means, and we did our best. we did that. There was a quick moment of realization that, yeah, it doesn't matter that we have this great idea and this thought, and we believe in local control, we thought, and there's all these things that we should be able to do. It was very apparent, and I'm sure apparent to all of you, that they were going down this road of removing local control, and any innovative ideas that looked a little too wild were not going to be allowed to go forward. So, when we, as the government entities, invested in this, I know from Windsor Heights' standpoint, we thought, what better way to have good information that we can use to hopefully improve the lives of our neighbors, right? In the before times, I would say, no one runs for office and says, I'm looking to make people's lives harder. In the before times.
In the before times.
So,
That was nice.
but what we have now is this ability to get this data and really take a look at some of the programs that we've been doing for years and understand, are they being effective? Are there things that we can do to better tailor some of the public programs that we fund to help our citizens out? And the preemption, has some very specific, like you can't do this thing, but I don't think it's going to stop us from finding ways to using this data to tailor, tweak the things that exist, to work with other programs to help alleviate something on this side so someone else can do something over here. I think there are ways that we will be able to work through some of this, but the idea that you have the opportunity to really understand your community and really understand what it means to help provide these services, or what it means for people's lives, for them to have hope, and how do we invest in it, is invaluable to us as public entities. So, hats off to Polk County and to Des Moines and Urbandale, who is always our sister in crime, it seems like, with Windsor Heights. We're just the bad idea bears together. Yeah. And so I think we'll take a further look at this and figure out how we can work through it. But the preemption was definitely short-sighted. There's definitely a fear of the unknown and a fear of the things that look a little too different than the way we've done. But if we have this poverty, if we have food insecurity, if people have the ability to pay the rent at a more affordable way, why not work on those things? And they're not going to go away. So that means that we have to be more innovative and thoughtful, but also pivot more in how we actually implement some of these programs that have existed forever, that we've never gone back and taken a look at their effectiveness.
Absolutely. I'm hearing a dedication to innovation, and I see that in this room too. So thank you all. Please help me thank our panelists today. So next up for you, we have a really special unveiling to share with you. About a year ago, Michael and I started a project to really create a documentary-style film that would tell the story of Uplift and what it was like to take this idea of basic income to the community. So today, with the help of Signature Productions, Teresa Zilk Consulting, Uplift storytellers, researchers, partners, funders, we are really proud to present to you Room to Breathe, the story of Uplift. Before we start, I'm going to let you know that it's a 30-minute film. We may run just a tiny bit over, but I hope you'll stay for the closing remarks. That will be very short.
In 2022, a diverse 11-member funding group came together to support a project that would help the Central Iowa community learn how to effectively support hardworking families who struggle to meet their basic needs. Born from this funding group came Iowa's first basic income study, Uplift, the Central Iowa Basic Income Pilot, with the goal to better understand how a basic income impacts Central Iowans' health and well-being. Participating in the study were 110 randomly selected individuals living in Polk, Dallas, and Warren counties. Due to the geography of Central Iowa, Uplift was uniquely positioned to include representation from the metropolitan, micropolitan, and rural areas all within a single study.
Well, if we'll recall, all these years ago, I had just started at Mid-Iowa Health Foundation, and I was meeting with my board chair, and he said, hey, so what are your big ideas? And at the time, I had been reading a lot about these basic income pilots, or guaranteed income pilots, that were popping up across the country. So there was really this interest, I felt, on this national level about this type of research. When I thought about what our priorities were as an organization, and that we were interested in being data-driven. We had this commitment to addressing the social determinants of health, what we would later call the social drivers of health, but also an interest in addressing systems change, so impacting health at a population level, not just talking about individual health outcomes. The idea of something like a basic income pilot for our community seemed to align really well with what our organization prioritized. So it was really refreshing to be able to kind of take this kernel of an idea and then go out to the community to see if they were interested in trying to participate in this type of initiative in our community.
For the work that we do and that we engage community with, I think it's a natural conversation that leads to ALICE, asset limited, income constrained, employed individuals in our community. So we know, and I know you know, that we have 33% of our population that are not able to survive. They're making impossible decisions between food and rent and childcare and so many other things. And so as we look at that, I think the findings from Project Uplift will help us look at how we pronounce to the community the importance of us understanding that when you think about 92,000 households in central Iowa that are ALICE, that's the equivalent of Ankeny, Waukee, West Des Moines, Bondurant, and Indianola. So all of those households would be on a survival budget. So I think the work that Project Uplift is doing can help us expound upon the real aspects of what people are facing in our community.
By supporting Uplift, Windsor Heights is really helping find solutions, right? This gave us the opportunity to giving participants the freedom to pursue better jobs, better education, to care for their kids and their families without fear of financial collapse.
Convincing others that we're going to invest in something that's going to take us some time and it's going to take some research, but it's going to actually give us information to be able to really, really hit home on the thing that we want to make the change, and not just the surface change, but like the deep-rooted change.
I think we were, so Annie Brand, who also works with me, when we heard about it, we were both really excited. I think it's a little bit different, right? And it's ground up, and I think it's a bit outside of the box. So people weren't maybe as aware of it or the concept at the time, but we were really excited to be part of something that was outside of the box and groundbreaking, and that really could address systemic problems.
Part of the goal, you know, we're in the business of solving problems and serving our residents. And this was an opportunity to help people immediately, but also think about how we do that in a better way. And we should always be looking to be data-driven, data-informed, and this was a way that we could have an immediate impact on a number of residents and then think about how we could have a better impact over the long term, how we could better use what is frequently very tight dollars in terms of solving problems, in terms of investing, giving back to our residents. This was a way to think about how we can use those dollars more effectively in the future to have the biggest impact and be most effective at the goals we're trying to accomplish.
So right after Let's Do It was some skepticism if something like that could be done in central Iowa, particularly in the way that Dr. Nalo had conceptualized it, covering urban and exurban, suburban, rural areas. She had the idea of bringing as many sectors of our community along for the ride as possible. So private funders, public sources, municipalities, right? And other nonprofits. If I wasn't aware of any funder collectives or collective action in that way around a project like this. And then my last thought was, oh boy, what a story we'd be able to tell as a community if we were able to pull it off.
In the fall of 2022, recruitment efforts for the pilot study began through collaborative conversations with local community-based organizations and businesses to help support outreach efforts across the study's area. In order to reach as many communities as possible, the project coordination team worked with several community-based organizations to understand what types of support they needed to be able to share the information about the pilot with various communities. From those conversations, the project coordination team worked with a local translation team to provide recruitment materials in 10 different languages, implementing safeguards to prevent financial abuse, and worked with trusted community leaders to craft messaging. To be eligible, individuals needed to be 18 years or older, live in Polk, Dallas, or Warren County, have a household income at or below 60% of AMI, have a dependent living with them up to the age of 25 years old. With this intentional outreach, over 50 community-based organizations helped with the recruitment of the pilot's participants. When the study's application opened in February of 2023, the study received over 6,000 eligible applications in just 10 days.
But I think one of the things that I'm most proud of is the engagement of all communities within our community and the true intentionality of how individuals were engaged, even as part of the application process. And I think it truly represented what I think of when I think of community participatory-based research and the focus on funding local organizations who have the relationships to get the word out. I think that whole process should truly be a model or framework for how future foundations or research is done with and by or for community members. And I think that's something that I think we will take forward in how we proceed with how we fund things, but truly one of the things I'm most proud of.
So the Uplift project first came to us in helping to both promote it and to help recruit people that would be part of it. So as a food pantry network, we have access to a lot of folks who are struggling one way or another financially. With food insecurity, there's usually 5 or 6 other things that folks are facing as well, and thought that would be a really good key population to recruit for participants for this program, and so we were happy to step up. When we look at the universe of roughly 80,000 unique individuals that will have come to one of our 14 pantries across the community, a big chunk of them are children. Roughly 37% of those getting the assistance are children in homes, so it's a lot of working families. More than 40% are usually working people. Folks that have jobs, they're just not making enough to get by to meet the cost of living, which has continued to rise while salaries really haven't. So they're facing a lot of different challenges, some of them more unique than others, and it's just this really kind of interesting melting pot of people that just aren't making enough to get by.
Yeah, we were thrilled to be asked to partner to be able to get the word out to the families we serve. And we serve thousands of low-income households in this area. And so we were able to put together a mailing and package to go out to those families. And so it was targeted right towards the families who would benefit the most from it. When we had calls back, the most typical reaction was, is this real? Is this a scam? I mean, because it sounds too good to be true, but then being able to assure people. And for the most part, people were very understanding about the fact that this wasn't a limitless resource. I mean, we sent out 10,000 letters to people who would qualify, and we got no calls that were negative in any way from the population we serve. They were understanding it was a research project. They were understanding that they may or may not get selected. And overall, it was, I think, a glimmer of hope for people who realize the reality every day of what it's like to grind through poverty.
As the director of the By Degrees Foundation, we work very closely with our public schools to identify all of those different resources and opportunities that might be in the community and help our families learn about them, gain access to them, understand what is out there. So in my work with By Degrees Foundation, I was made aware of this project that was trying to get off the ground that focused on basic income. And I was immediately drawn to it because we see so much with the kids that we work with that just having a little bit of extra income would make such a huge difference for our families. And so that's how I got connected with Uplift and learn more about the project. And so we worked really hard to help our families understand what this is and sign up for the lottery in order to be a part of it.
So again, in doing all of that early reading and what was occurring elsewhere across the country, one of the early research teams that came forward as leaders in this field were Dr. Amy Castro and Dr. Stacia West at the Center for Guaranteed Income Research at the University of Pennsylvania. So I remember holding an early meeting with them to just kind of learn about what their study design was like, how many other communities they had helped support, what it would take from a budgetary standpoint in order to implement that study design within our community. And it was really helpful, A, to be able to have concrete understanding of cost, but also know that they had supported so many other communities that this wasn't going to be something brand new for them, that they had an established protocol. We would have the potential to have our data be compared across all the other sites that they were supporting as well. And so that was really attractive, rather than just going with a research team where it may be the first time they were trying to put a randomized controlled trial like this together. It was also really important, again, given this community-based participatory research approach, and wanting to have our local research institutions also engaged. So we ensured that the public health department at Des Moines University would be on the ground research support for our UPenn research team, and also that project coordination would be led at the Harkin Institute out of Drake University. And that piece was really critical because we wanted to make sure that our community partners were just as engaged with this project as the research components were.
So CGIR, the Center for Guaranteed Income Research, started in 2020 when we saw this rise in interest from a number of communities that were interested in experimenting with unconditional cash for many reasons. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, in response to persistent and seemingly intractable economic inequality. So what CGIR does is partners academia with community-based organizations and local governments. And our real charge is to help understand how unconditional cash works in various different communities, so and for various populations. So what we do is produce really high-level, rigorous research that partners mixed methods, so both qualitative research alongside quantitative research, so that communities can better understand how unconditional cash may drive outcomes for specific populations.
If we think about the policy space and the safety net, we typically have community-based organizations or elected officials sort of introducing new programs, interventions, pilots, policies, all these different types of things, but we very rarely attach science to it, right? And so when we do that and we skip the step of understanding who it works for and how, then what we tend to be doing is designing policies and programs based on conjecture, ideology, rather than figuring out what works and who does it work for and how. So really what our goal is as a center is to provide organizations and policymakers with evidence, sort of like strong evidence-based data around unconditional cash in order to inform policymaking.
So we have measures about housing and perceptions of child development within the family, mental health, perceptions of well-being, adult mattering, so how much do you think you matter to those people who you interact with in your life, perceived stress for you and your household and your family, measures of food insecurity, just a lot of measures that tap into the many ways that it's possible that additional income might impact a family.
Where this momentum on unconditional cash or guaranteed income has been coming from, which, until the past few years, really has been concentrated on the coast or in large cities and has really left the Midwest out of the conversation. And so if you think about, again, wanting to understand, the evidence around unconditional cash, you can't just study things in one location and expect it to apply everywhere, right? And so one of the things that's the most exciting to us about working with Uplift is the fact that it centers the voices, the experiences, and the data of people from Iowa And it brings Iowa into this larger conversation around unconditional cash and helps us lead from the middle.
Following the research team's randomization of both treatment and control group participants, the project coordination team offered one-on-one onboarding sessions to all 110 individuals receiving the intervention. To prepare the individuals for the next 24 months of payments and surveys, onboarding sessions included benefits counseling, a review of how their data would be used throughout the study, and information on how to use their prepaid debit card where they would receive their payments. On May 15th, 2023, Uplift participants received their first monthly income payment from the study.
It is so critical if someone's getting a needs-based benefit, whether it's Medicaid or supplemental security income, to understand when they're getting any sort of other cash payment, how that's going to affect their benefit. Because it can be easy to say, I'm going to give you $500 a month, and that's going to positively impact you, when that could really, and in some cases when we were projecting, it actually was going to give them a more negative financial situation. And you wouldn't immediately think that unless you understood all the very complicated rules. And so that's why it was so critical, because we wanted people to make an educated decision.
A lot of people won't even take a raise or a promotion because they know if they earn at a certain level, they may be no longer eligible for, let's say, health insurance, or they may lose the food assistance, or especially childcare that has such a low income eligibility level that if they start to earn more money or have that stipend kind of thing with the Uplift project, you could lose out on those kind of supports.
Being an advocate, every legislative session, you try to plan as best as you can for what to expect, work on bills that you want to see advance, try to prepare for bills that you don't want. And I think this, frankly, I was a bit blindsided by this bill. I didn't expect to have a basic income preemption bill, come up to have to deal with. But, I've been doing defensive advocacy around SNAP for probably going on 8 years now. And we see a lot of attacks on public assistance programs. We've seen that over the years. And specifically one group, for a Florida-based think tank, that really came into the state of Iowa in 2016 to start pushing quote-unquote welfare reform bills around SNAP and Medicaid. I worked really hard along with coalition partners to try to fight back against that bill. Unfortunately, it did pass and was signed by the governor. So that's definitely a setback. And I think we've seen this type of preemption legislation before, not related to basic income in the past, but I mean, we've seen it when counties have tried to raise the minimum wage, certain housing policies that cities and counties have enacted, community ID programs, and I think that this state preemption legislation, it really inhibits innovative policies because it doesn't allow for cities or counties to try something out on a small scale before testing it out for a statewide program. When we think about policy development, you want those pilots to study and see how things work and learn best practices before trying to do anything large scale, or maybe you find from a pilot, hey, this isn't the right approach. Maybe we need to look at something different. But by just shutting things down, before they can even get started, I think it really does stifle innovation.
Things were so great. The movement was great. The community interaction was great. And to have our own state step up and say, no, local governments, local communities cannot support this kind of effort was so disheartening and so unnecessary. And I never imagined that that would be one of the outcomes of this, that there would be governmental officials who would stop locales from taking action against poverty.
What we're concerned about is the legislature continuing to take away from us the opportunity for local control. And that is so important because what our task is to make the lives of the people in Windsor Heights better.
That saying, when you take 2 steps forward, there's always that obstacle where you take 3 steps back. That's the type of situation that I was in, where I was, like I said, I was working in the corporate world for 6 years, to where every time I felt like I was ahead, I was always taking that 2 to 3 steps back. So participating with the Uplift program, I was able to resign from my corporate job, and I was able to start my LLC, so then that way I could be able to start that generational wealth for myself and my family. So once I obtained custody of my 2 grandchildren, and working a 9 to 5 just seemed impossible, because I had doctor's appointment, therapy, things, court dates that I had to attend, where I had to be available to. So therefore, I had to make that hard decision, to where it was causing me health issues, where high blood pressure, anxiety. So I had to make that hard decision to be able to resign, and having that discipline and confidence within myself that I could be able to start that LLC. So then that way I could be able to work on my own terms, and also being able to make those financial resources come in, so I could be able to take care of myself and my family. As I'm sitting here right now, after this interview, I will be attending the Drake Accelerator class. So that's what I am doing to prepare myself as exiting the program. We're just building up, my educational skills to be able to run a successful business.
I just started making a list of just some of the results from this. So some of the bigger ones, it allowed me to quit my second job. Like I mentioned, I had 2 jobs at the time. One was a corporate job, one was not quite as big, but it was still bringing in income, and so I was able to quit that and have more time to focus on my children. So that was huge, which led, like I said, to a promotion and more confidence and space in my life. Charitable donations, I was able to give away some money. Groceries, starting an emergency fund and a savings account. So I've never been able to do that since I was on a single income. It was just too difficult. Well, when I first started, I was in survival mode. So it was definitely the needs of my kids. Being able to, feel some breathing room to provide groceries and not wonder if I would just get bare essentials, but, extra stuff. Toiletries, extra gas. I had some bills that needed to be paid. Just thinking through, like, okay, what am I going to do first? And then that's when I started making goals. Okay. But yeah, probably the most basic needs is what I put at the top of the list. Also, I think just sacrificing, like I said, my schooling. I want to go for more. I love learning. I'll probably always be a lifelong learner. So that has really been empowering, to be able to have that paid for and to finish just 2 years, about 11 hours a week with full-time job, full-time mom, managing sports and whatnot, being able to say, okay, I did this, it felt really, really good.
Knowing that I had 2 kids that depended on me, and making sure that their needs were met with me not losing my cool, because I would be stressed out in regards to not having enough money to really take care of all of their needs. So that would have to be the hardest part, just the stress of not knowing how I was going to do everything that I needed to do. Well, having the funds that were not limited gave me the space to breathe a little bit. And I was in a position that was a dead end position. I felt like I was really stuck there. And leaving a career, if you want to call it that, it was just kind of not a great company to work for. They didn't believe in you as a person. It was just about numbers, I feel like. And so I'd applied for positions and kept getting denied for, I never felt like it was a valid reason. And then having the income gave me really like the space or the freedom to know that I was going to be able to pay my bills and maybe leave where I was at. It really gave me the courage to take that first step. And I did. And I'm with a completely different company now. And I've moved up just in the last year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I've applied for different opportunities within it. Like I'm doing an apprenticeship and like with another department. And I've done training for, like they call it arena coaching. So I've been doing training with new hires and I feel so supported.
Okay.
And I can't even imagine being where I was 2 years ago. A couple months ago before the holidays, I was discussing or thinking out loud about going and getting my master's and finishing or continuing my education because I love to learn. And yeah, I don't feel like my journey is over, like I'm not fulfilling my full purpose. And I think that it gave me the push that I needed to see that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have a lot of life going forward, and I think that being a part of this, the shifts in my personal life, and it has supported me through all of those, and it's gotten me to the point where I can continue the story without it.
In the time between being approached to participate in the project and now, we have drafted and approved a human services strategic plan for the city of Urbandale, which is something we've never done before. And I see us using the data that's coming out of Project Uplift to help us guide implementation of that plan.
We really hope that Windsor Heights can be an example to other communities and other small cities that you do not have to be big to be bold, right? You do not have to be big to be bold. You just have to care enough to act. And that's something that our council is very proud of, that we try to listen to the people in our community. What do they need, and how can we help them be successful in our community and in their everyday lives?
By Degrees Foundation has worked in public schools for 35 years. And we have made a tremendous impact in the lives of thousands of kids. But we still see so many limitations that are completely outside of our control. And if the Uplift project can inform policy that helps our decision makers restructure the way we utilize public benefits or restructure other economic opportunities, that sort of underlying economic stability is going to have transformative impact in education and in health and in our housing sector.
One thing that I'm hopeful for is that the public will see this and they'll say, we need to make change. You know, we're all Americans. We all need that at time to time. Everybody needs assistance. And there's nothing wrong, you know, with receiving public benefits. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make change. All of it is okay. You know, it's just a matter of let's inform people that we can do different things. We can try different things and make it work for that individual. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
You know, you just don't know the exact life that's going to be changed. So I would just say thank you and, you know, just affirm them that I'm already incorporating ways in my life where I can pay it forward.
Just thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing us. Thank you for building me up because it just definitely has touched me in a profound way that I wasn't expecting.
Because it's made a huge impact on my life. I know it's made a huge impact on the other people that have been a part of this program. Keep it up. It's beautiful, and it was a beautiful experience for me, and I think everyone should have the opportunity if they need it.
I think that at the end of the day, I think that this data is going to be shared far and wide. And I think we can all sit there and say, you know, we were part of that. So I'm very proud of that.
The goal of this job is to create a community that works better for everyone and provides opportunity to everyone. And that means we need to think about how we constantly improve everything that we do. It means that we need to be data-driven and willing to look at data to inform how we do things, and sometimes be willing to do things differently than what we've done before if there's evidence that we can do it better if we do it differently. And that's what this is about. It's about helping provide that opportunity to everyone in our community, and then trying to understand, is there a way that we can use dollars better, use dollars more effectively to have an even bigger impact than what we're doing today?
This project was never about we're yay or nay on the concept of basic income. It was the idea that we think data should drive decision making and that we should be innovative in our public health and human services space. So desiring to bring forth scientifically valid research data to inform our decision making was the one and only goal we had for this project.
Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I know we're a few minutes over, but my comments are short, I promise you. On behalf of the 11-member public and private funder group, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening to not only learn about the results of this study, but to truly celebrate our community and our courage that we had to engage in such an initiative as a basic income pilot. When I look across the room tonight, nearly everyone who's here tonight has engaged in this study in some way over the last 3.5 years. You may have been a community partner that assisted us with participant recruitment. You may be one of the members of our funder collaborative organizations. You may be a community member who has attended one or maybe many of our community conversations events. And you may be one of the 250 participants who gave their time and their perspectives for 30 months in order for our community to be able to learn from your experiences. To all of you, in whatever role you may have played in this study, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being on this journey with us and joining us in this community-wide collaborative learning opportunity. I also want to thank our lead research team, Dr. Amy Castro and Dr. Stacer West, and our local research team, Dr. Rochelle Reimer, for your instructive analysis with this effort. I also want to acknowledge the amazing leadership of our project coordination team, Ashley Ezio and Michael Berger. Hiding in the back. Ashley and Michael truly took on our vision for a cross-sector collaborative effort, and they cultivated an unprecedented sense of community engagement, particularly with the participant recruitment process. In addition, they engaged community members far and wide through an innovative community conversation series that brought forth critical program information, expert-led presentations, and research-based community solutions to the forefront of our conversations. And they did so through modalities that range from book clubs to expert-led panels to a museum-style housing exhibit in a 20-foot crate. Thank you for having such a meaningful approach to ensure that all in our community could truly engage in this work. So the question becomes, what did we learn about the potential for basic income as a poverty reduction strategy in our community? And I feel like my takeaways are some of what we already know, which is we have many community members who work hard in our community. However, their work does not equal economic stability. As the research team pointed out, basic income strengthens participants' ability to save, reduce their stress, and strengthen their ability to activate on their goals. And they did so through the ways in which the unconditional cash support allowed them to be flexible in being able to meet their needs. As a result, these hardworking participants felt more of a sense of community because they felt valued by having their community invest in them through this program. So what comes next? While the Basic Income Pilot is officially concluded, the experience has sparked our desire as a funder collaborative to continue to move forward with this type of cross-sector collaboration. Thus, we are evolving the Uplift banner into a portfolio of research to inform economic mobility solutions that seeks to use local data to inform local policies and local programs. And if I knew how to use the clicker, maybe the team back there can switch for me. Thank you. So our next initiative is the Central Iowa Emergency Rental Assistance Study, which will focus on identifying the most effective length of time to provide emergency rental assistance to a household who's experiencing a crisis in order to get that household back into an economically stable situation. And we view this project as a direct response to our community's desire for homelessness prevention solutions. So if you're a funder in the room and you're not already a part of our funder collaborative, please reach out to me because we always have room at our table. So I want to thank you all again for joining us tonight and for being on this journey with us. Thank you for believing in the importance of data-driven and community-informed approaches to addressing our community's needs. With that, I want to wish you good night, but also remind everyone to pick up the Project Coordinations Team final publication, which is their Lessons Learned document. It's available in the back for you. It's really their perspective of what the experience of implementation of this initiative has been. And also make you aware that the research team's briefs will be available on our Uplift website tomorrow. So again, thank you for being here, and thank you for being with us along this journey. Good night.